Well, good morning and good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Winlaw. I'm the Vice President of Amelia Australia and New Zealand, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar out of Sydney this morning. Many thanks to EXL for co-hosting this event, and Abby Bowler, Vice President of Australia in particular, for co-hosting alongside me. Well, we've seen the global pandemic accelerate digital transformation across industries, and it's changing the way people think about insurance, how they interact with insurance providers, what kind of coverage they need, what products and pricing do they want. In fact, customers' expectations of value from their insurers is also evolving. Customer engagement at all touch points needs to be instant, enhanced, simplified and personalised, whether at the quotation, purchase, renewal or claim phase of the customer lifecycle. Insurers are adopting new digital capabilities and enhancing the ones they already possess at an accelerated pace. In many cases, this has served as a trigger point for the application of conversational AI and automation. Today, we're very privileged to be able to ask some both local and global industry experts from across the globe as to how they are tackling this. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Amelia Chief Commercial Officer and moderator for today's event, Jonathan Crane. Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Avi, both. We appreciate the opportunity. What we've done is we put together a panel of experts, as Andrew was describing, and today we are privileged to have a pioneer from Sydney, Australia, Jamie Stevoski, who is the Customer Experience and Digital Enablement Manager at IAG Australia. Now, he's joined by a veteran of AI campaigns, Tajesh Patel, the VP and Chief Architect at Guardian Life in the United States. And then lastly, they're joined by Ankar Rai, the Chief Digital Officer at EXL, a global leader in digital process transformation. Gentlemen, welcome. Now, our intent is to draw out from the panel meaningful dialogue on their experiences with AI and the stepping stone technologies like IVR, chatbots, and RPA, as they seek to transform the customer experience in the insurance industry. Now, we'll start with a few warm-up questions, and then we're going to turn the tables on you, the attendees, by taking a couple of polls. And lastly, keeping time at the end of our hour today so that you can have a chance to ask questions. We do that by submitting via the chat mechanism. We'll accumulate those questions, and at the end, we'll have a chance to have the panel respond. So let's get ourselves kicked off. The first question we're going to ask, Ankar, if you would start us off. And here's the question. How have you at your insurance company, or Ankar at EXL, benefited from leveraging conversational AI in providing improvements in customer experience? And if you could, give some examples of success or share the process pain you may have incurred. Ankar.
Sure, Jonathan. Thanks for the opportunity. So we've had the benefit of actually working with a variety of insurance clients across Australia, the UK and Europe, as well as North America. And we've seen their transformation journey over the last 10 plus years. What's interesting is what I would call the process-driven, robotics-driven transformation, which happened around the middle of the last decade, was focused on efficiency, right? It got the low-hanging fruit, processes were improved. For example, if you were talking about a first notification of loss process, the approach there was, sure, let's try to reduce the cost, let's automate an arm and a leg here. And then came three big changes. The insurtechs came, and they've changed the definition of what customers think is quality. For customers today, speed is quality. Personalization is quality. They don't care about whether you've reduced your cost. COVID came, and you needed a strong AI-driven way of handling clients. And finally, the benefit that could be got by simple automation started decreasing, and data-driven technologies needed to be deployed. And at the at the intersection of all these are some of the use cases we're going to talk about. In insurance, there are really three moments of truth. First, notification of loss. It's when you are acquiring a customer, a new business submission, or a billing and payment. And what our insurance clients are doing is they're deploying conversational AI as close to the customer at these three moments of truth. So let me take one example of a P&C insurer. They identified the first notification of loss as a really critical process. And they figured out that the reason those processes caused customer dissatisfaction or a bad customer experience was not because they couldn't straight through the process. It was while getting data from the customer to set up the claim. It was a longish process. They sometimes missed data. They had to call the customer back. The customer had questions. They could proactively address those. We deployed conversational AI, and actually, Jonathan, our teams have worked very closely together on this because we actually are deploying Amelia for this customer, and it's game-changing. It's game-changing because not only are you able to get all the data that's needed at the time the claim is being set up, so that's smooth, you actually are able to proactively inform the customer about where their claim is. But it's game-changing because when the customer tries to trick the AI, and they figure out that the AI is smart enough to actually work with them, for example, context switching, those moments of truth are priceless because that leaves a mark on the customer. And it sort of creates a feeling of not just, oh, I've had a great process that's simple, but it also feels, oh, I'm working with technology that understands me. And I think that's where conversational AI is really making a big impact for our clients.
Excellent, thank you. I like the game-changing concept. Let's go over to Guardian Life and see what's been your experience.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. Good evening and good morning. Our experience has been, I would just add to what Ankur had said. I mean, I think COVID has been, I would say, an accelerator due to the circumstances that we're all going through. And then the other piece is, I think we as consumers of other products and services are becoming accustomed to seamless real-time. So if it's an Uber, if it's Amazon, if it's Netflix, et cetera. So how can we as a company be on par with our own experiences? So from a Guardian, we are using also Amelia, but we call our digital assistant Hugo as our founder of Guardian Life Insurance, and that's who we created the name. We started, with our overall strategies to get it across all of our business lines and products, but we started our group benefits, specifically around our call center, around claims and verification of benefits. We're seeing a major adoption on the chat site more, with about 40% containment. And usually if the questions are not answered, it's due to some complex type of questions, or that we haven't trained the engine just yet. Similarly, on the voice side, I think we're focusing more and more on that. But I think the complexity, again, I think it's not the AI, it's sometimes the carrier and the languages and the definitions of our products and the complexity of our products. And especially when you go on the dental side and vision side, the tooth type and the dentist appointment, et cetera. So I think there's some work to also be done on simplification, not just from a legacy platform or legacy technology. I think there's also improvements that we have to do from a definition of product classes and et cetera. So, but overall, we're about a year into production. COVID made us accelerate that production, and the focus also for us is not just for a group line of business, move it across our individual markets line of business, as well as our digital to consumer by line of business and our absence management line of business.
Well, I think COVID kept me from getting to the dentist, so I'll give Hugo a call and make sure I'm covered. Thank you for sharing that. I want to go now to IAG Australia and Jamie. I know that he's beginning this journey and looking at these technologies and giving his leadership to his corporation. So Jamie, what are you seeing?
Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for coming today. I guess from my perspective, if I kind of add firstly a bit on Tajesh, what you kind of mentioned, simplification is key, because I think in order to overcome the complexities of an organization, you obviously would like to simplify what that experience looks like. But I think if I think more specifically to the claims experience that we have across organizations, what's quite key is around understanding your customer. right? So by leveraging the the AI insights, you really understand who your customers are, what they need, and effectively by doing so, what we are then creating a purposeful experiences. If you kind of dive into the claims experience, there are effectively around 3 possible high level outcomes from a claim. You can either procure or settle someone with money. You can total loss or replace something, or you can repair it, right? So I guess when you think about those 3 high level outcomes, that they can take some time. So the real key through AI conversational techniques is around how do you address the pain point and maximize the speed and the scale across your customer base. So that's probably my short kind of answer, Jonathan, around that. But I guess to kind of unpack that by linking in those pain points, you are setting yourself up for success and effectively not going around in circles, right? So sometimes what organizations do, which kind of leads to not great customer experiences, is when you are implementing solutions without actually a common customer outcome that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, we think about chatbots as transaction oriented, but when we move into conversational AI, we're opening the door to human-like interactions and more rapid problem resolutions. We're looking at knowledge accumulation and really equipping a human-like capability to have the kind of conversations you were all describing. There's higher productivity associated with this for the agent and his partner in crime, this digital worker. But I think I would ask the question of the 3 of you, has this been your experience, or is there still some hype to kind of iron out? And Tajesh, I would start with you. What's your feeling? Is it living up to the expectations? Is it delivering these kinds of really differentiated ability, or are we not quite there yet?
So I think I wouldn't call it hype. I think it's the evolutionary or next stage of where we need to get to. It is delivering based on, I think, early stage outcomes, right? As opposed to advanced, complex type scenarios. We at Guardian are looking and are soon to implementing for our claims experience the ability to take Hugo, enable it with RPA to do an auto adjudication of a claim within seconds. So we do realize that we're going to have to stitch components together. The other piece, I think, maybe the hype part of it is, I think all of us have to start thinking about these what I'll call AI systems. So SaaS providers have built-in AI systems, Salesforce, Oracle, Workdays, etc. You have these large cloud carriers that also have AI systems that are looking to be built, and then you have software just like Amelia from IPsoft that also have AI systems. The area we have to start thinking about is data, and because you're not recreating data for each AI system, you actually have one data set that the AI systems are looking to interface with. You almost think of them as I'll call it the organizational brain. So you have the claim, you have the customer service, you have marketing, you have sales. Each one of those are like their own brains. But how do you have a unified AI system across all of those entities? And will it be one? You hear about Google, for example. They have internally a Google brain. So, Google runs around on one system. For enterprises, I think it comes down to how do we get to that level, or at least have brains talk to each other, aka AI systems talk to each other intelligently. Because over time, just like this call, there's 7, 8 of us on this call. Eventually, we may have an Amelia also join us and say, okay, now let's have a discussion in a panel. Maybe not today, but in 3 to 5 years, we may have Amelia actually have a discussion with us about her maturity. So I think the AI system and the ability for AI systems to communicate is going to be a very key area. And that's where I think the hype will turn into reality, but we're still early stages.
Well, I want you to know we invited Hugo to the call, but he turned us down.
Yeah, it's late in the day.
It was a tough one. It was a tough one. Ankur, would you like to build on some of the things that Tajesh was talking about?
Yeah, I would. And Tajesh made some very interesting points. I think it feels like hype sometimes for two reasons. One, AI works beautifully in the lab, right? And to Tejesh's point, when you actually take it into the real world, it doesn't. And it feels like, oh, that's hype because we thought it would solve world hunger over here and it's not working. And I think the reason it doesn't work sometimes is because of bad data. And you've got to choose the correct use case, right? There's this tendency, there's this human tendency when faced with a machine. Let me give it the most difficult problem first, right? That's not the way we treat our kids though. Kids start in first grade. They don't start with the most difficult science problem first. I think that contributes to this feeling of hype sometimes. Things in the lab may not work in production. But there's another reason, and it's a very subtle one. As compared to all the previous automation technologies over the last 10 years, this one is actually an evolutionary one, right? What we mean by that is it starts, it learns, then it becomes better and better and better. And what you get is this exponential improvement. And I think if you expect what you will get at the end of 12 months, at the end of month one, sometimes it doesn't work because you're expecting this, oh, I switch this on and it should work. So I think hype is probably a wrong word. A lot of these subtleties get clubbed under hype. It's just, you've got a partner, you've got to have someone who's done this before to help you actually navigate the waters. And I think some of the insights that Tajesh had about, oh, sometimes it's not the AI, it's the data. How do we work through that? That's pretty critical. Otherwise, sometimes there could be disillusionment.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think the expectation of the technology is to be immediately available and do all the things and, AGI, as they call it, it's incredible. You got start tomorrow and it's there. And what we're doing, though, is we are accelerating the pace at which an Amelia or intelligent conversational intelligence can operate. And it used to be a lot longer time frame, which frustrated people. And I think that's where the hype came from. It took too long to get the ROI, too long to get it going. Jamie, just a comment from you.
Yeah, look, probably a couple things come to mind. I guess it's probably really critical, I guess, when you are moving into that kind of, I guess, era of AI around being really clear from going from 0 to 100. So often, organizations, get quite romanced by the robots and often try to get to the end game, overnight. But it's quite important to break that plan down, break down what your horizons, and what you're trying to achieve. And I think, both gentlemen kind of touched on data, and I think that's quite key. I think a second piece, which comes hand in hand with data, is process refinement. So, they're often, organizations have a lot of legacy. They've got a lot of, design that's been there for years and years and years. And in order to apply, an AI kind of like outcome, you need to refine, you need to innovate, and you need to, really challenge yourself around what you currently do in the current kind of climate and really evolve. And I think, COVID's obviously accelerated a lot of that. But I definitely think that, thinking differently, and customers' needs are evolving, so businesses need to evolve with that as well. The other thing as well, Jonathan, would probably be productivity, and never kind of, moving into this era of AI with just a productivity lens. So it's quite important that, AI and humans work hand in hand, and especially in the current kind of world, vulnerability is a key piece, right? So how we kind of, bring speed and scale through kind of high volume, low complexity scenarios, but then also, how do we deflect the more kind of nurturingness that we need to apply through it, that a human can apply in those day-to-day conversations with customers. So freeing up their capacity so that they can have that time to spend that with customers.
Thank you. Good points all. So this is the moment where we're going to magically put up our first poll and ask you to participate. And this word hype, I think I would agree with Ankur. I don't know that it's so much hype. It's just that it was such high expectations and then making sure that the execution met those expectations, not getting out ahead of ourselves, as Jamie was describing, good pacing, building that kind of intent recognition, getting the accuracy, all these things are necessary. But we asked this question, is conversational AI in insurance just hype? Well, yes, it's just another technology. I hope that you don't believe that. I'll prejudice the answer. Or do you believe that it can help insurers better deliver customer experience? So we'll see what your experience has been as you vote on that poll. So we'll go to, after we have a chance to vote, I'm presuming you do that, and Jean will go to the next question. So let's continue while the poll is up in front of you. Let's move on to RPA and chatbots and IVRs, which most of us have already widely deployed. How can insurers look beyond these standalone point solutions and embark upon making AI an integral part of an enterprise overhaul and a future roadmap? And Ankur, I'll start with you.
Sure. Can you hear me? Oh, that's great. So I think, Jonathan, it starts with some of what are the gaps in customer experience with existing technologies. Why do you need to move to AI? You don't need to move to AI just because everyone is, right? What are the gaps? And I think when you think of a typical customer experience with, say, a traditional IVR, where does it break down? As a human, when we're speaking with someone, we switch contexts. And there's this great example. We were deploying this for in insurance for an agent-based environment. When a broker calls up, right, they're talking about multiple customers. So they might be asking about coverage for another customer. And at the same time, while they're doing that, they might have a question around whether you set up a claim for another or onboarded a third customer. If you try to do that with an IVR, you'd pretty much crash and burn, and you'd immediately get moved to someone who could handle your complaint better. In fact, try this with Alexa. Try to ask Alexa the weather, and before she answers that question, try to trick her and do something else. It's going to break down. However, when you get to conversational AI technology, it's built for that. It's built to have a conversation. And I think those are the use cases where it really works. So the first step really is you need to look beyond to improve the customer experience and do things today's technology couldn't do. After you've sort of got done with that, what we've seen is some of the use cases. So we were working with a health insurer, and for an authorization, a customer or a provider has to fill up a large form, and sometimes they can't do that alone. We actually deployed Amelia to help the customer fill out the form and provide the support. Another great use case. So that's the way I would think about it. Look at the gaps in today's technology and look at how you could make the customer experience and remove friction better. And that's where conversational AI will really have a large impact.
Jamie, your opinion.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ankur, that you were kind of raised, and I feel that I'm fully aligned to that in the sense that by organisations really understanding the customer strategy that they're trying to achieve, AI is an enabler of that, right? So what's quite key in the early stages is really understanding that, if you look at RPA as a standalone solution, it's good. Right? Does it solve everything? Definitely won't. So by kind of connecting in firstly with your customer strategy, and building out visibility of what your journey looks like. So, getting quite intimate around journey blueprinting and looking at, what's the start of that journey look like all the way to the end. Effectively, then what you are doing is you're designing an optimal experience by connecting those, AI solutions kind of end to end. I guess failure in understanding the journey, it's going to lead to ineffective solutions in the long run. You might not see them straight away. You will celebrate and it will look quite successful at the surface when you first go live, but over time, you're actually creating additional complexities into the customer experience. So by anchoring yourself back to what's that journey, blueprint look like, what's that end outcome that the customer, wants to achieve, that's going to be the critical way of enabling AI, I believe.
Yeah, and I think just to make the quick point, I think that if you look at what problem are you trying to solve, what's the
Yep.
complexity associated with that, and then choose your technologies appropriately. And that's one of the things I think we're learning is where do these things fit? And it all depends on what problem are you trying to solve, and then design the technology to go after that solution. Tajesh, your opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with what's been shared so far. I think it's the Amazon saying working backwards, put the customer at the center, right? I think that's the key. And then also I think there's just like big data and cloud years ago, AI, the irony in AI, it's actually been around longer than cloud and big data. It's been around since the 60s and 50s. But I think the definition around conversational versus document versus what I'll call machine learning data science is critical, but also has to be connected. And then while we're talking about conversational AI, it's about the customer experience, as Ankur said, right? So it's more web, mobile, chat, voice. They all have to be connected. If you have departmental structures that are not connecting those, I think that will just create more bad customer experience, right? And Jamie brought it up. I think it's key to have what we call it a customer life journey or customer value stream or customer experience. I mean, you got to ensure that the AI construct is at the foundation as opposed to just one end of the pillar. If not, then you're going to have, what we've seen, technical debt or not customer lift, and then all of a sudden AI is a failure at an enterprise. I think it's key to, from an enterprise view, I think to your point, Jonathan, it's got to be an enterprise focus for the customer, not just one, not just the call center, for example, or a contact center. So I think that's what I would add to that.
Yeah, I used the point about what problem you are trying to solve, but it's also what's the nature of the design you're trying to implement, and how do you bring this about, and cooperatively doing that with companies like EXL, or if we're picked for Amelia to come alongside and assist. But that's a key thing, the design of what you're trying to accomplish. I think that is extremely well said. And it leads to a follow-on question, it's kind of connected, and that is, you must have hit some roadblocks while you've been trying to be a pioneer in your companies and really introduce this technology. And so what have you seen in terms of speed of adoption of AI-enabled customer support? Jamie, I'll let you start off.
It's a great question. So Jonathan, I'll probably look at it in a sense that just because you build it doesn't mean that they will come. So when you are building, solutions and leveraging, artificial intelligence, it's quite key to kind of understand, what is the end game, and how will you, either retain customers, within that experience, or how will you acquire them, to enter that. So I guess what's really key when you are designing in those early phases is it's great to build it, it's great to have that experience, but then, are customers effectively going to be using it? And I see that as a really key kind of blocker or enabler or a challenge, I guess, for organizations where you've got this great experience, but is it great if only 1% of your customers are seeing it? So it's around how do you get that that type of capability closer to the customer. UX is quite key to be able to maximize and infuse that experience into the day-to-day kind of offerings. I guess the other kind of challenge as well is that with the current global pandemic and more locally around weather-related events, organizations are pivoting quicker towards AI, and customers are more demanding than ever. So it's almost around how do you kind of get the solution out to customers, and how do you ensure that they know that it's there, to be able to be used.
And I would say one of the challenges that COVID brought was what I call rapid training, rapid accumulation of expertise. How do you take people, humans, and stick them into these centers and these environments and rapidly train them and get them to a level of competency where the customers are going to be satisfied? That, I think, was a very hard thing to do. And we learned a thing about business continuity now also includes humans. Humans are a part of that factor. It's not just compute and infrastructure. So Tajesh, you must have encountered some impediments on the way.
Definitely. I think I just to sound like maybe an overhyped broken record, but I think data has got to be of good quality, clean quality, but I think above that, ensuring that I'll call it your interaction layer or service layer, as it's called, is built around APIs, because it's not just one and done. You want to ensure that you have consistency. Building an API structure, an API architecture, and API governance is key, and then determining batch versus real time. Because if we're saying AI, the automatic presumption is real time, simplified, intelligent, etc. But if your processes, to even Jamie earlier, right? If your processes are not changing and your technology is not changing, and you have a batch level component, that's where you're going to run into some challenges. So I think data integration layer, and then your consumption layer, which is your AI system, have to be in sync. If not, you'll start seeing challenges. And we're seeing a shift more and more with the three that I just mentioned: AI, API, and data, almost being a product by itself over time for systems, right? Because it's one together, and they're evolving in that direction. And then if you think about ring fencing the data with your API, then your API can be used not just from an AI system, but for other systems, right? I think that's the key too. So having a strong service layer is as critical as having a strong AI system. That's what we've learned, and that's what we're investing more and more into.
That's great. Ankur, why don't you wrap up this one, and then we're going to give the attendees another chance for a poll. So bring us home on this one.
So I think you talked about adoption challenges, Jonathan. I think there are two customers where you have adoption challenges. There's the internal customer, who also has to adopt the AI as much as your external one. And we've seen as many successful implementations as we have ones where, we figured out you've got to do something different. And I'm going to get a little geeky over here. Over time, we've actually developed an equation. We think the problem with these AI projects is you try to embed AI in a spaghetti process that you have today. Today's processes are designed for what we call a human operating system. It takes a process moves, it's like a pinball, moves from an expert to operations, from one legacy infrastructure to another. You've got to move to the AI operating system, and we've broken it up into 4 parts. The first, the AI has to be upstream. What it means, it has to be as close to the real world as possible so that it can convert that real world signal into clean data. The second, your spaghetti process has to be redesigned, and you've got to design it along a data flow. Data as the crow flies, not that spaghetti process. So it's an analytics embedded data flow. The third, you've got to use the cloud, because sometimes you get into this trap of using legacy technology, bandages all over, it doesn't work. And the last, we get into this feeling that we're going to eliminate humans. The AI operating system is actually about elevating the human, removing them from these manual tasks to actually becoming AI coaches. So I think that's how we think about internal customer adoption. I think Tajesh and Jamie did talk a lot about external customer adoption.
Well, I think that when we really think about where this is all going, I just want you to know that Hugo sent me a note and said it's about data. And just, you've trained your conversational AI capability very, very well. We're going to give you the second chance at a poll. And this time it's not going to be yes or no. We're going to put this up. And what we're really talking about, since we've just had the panel opine on this subject, we're talking about what is the main challenge that hinders an AI initiative. Now you get one of 4 choices here. Legacy insurance systems. We know we're all plagued by legacies and associated integrations, often hard to do. Lack of usable and useful data for successful AI adoption. Unsuccessful prior initiatives with chatbots. Many people can point to that. And pinpoint and point solution automation. And then lastly, available AI platforms that are not mature for enterprise adoption. So give a thought to this. We'll give you a minute or so to really think about this. And then I want to go to just reading you as you can look at this. I'm going to read you a quote from a recent article. And it says, according to the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average customer service representative stays on a job for less than a year. Less than a year. We go back to that whole training issue that we were talking about just briefly. And I really do think that one of the challenges we have is maintaining the people that we're training in order to provide this service. And this is another area where conversational AI can really come in and be beneficial. So as you've thoughtfully filled out your poll, we're going to go to another area that I think begs some discussion, and that is a question to the three of you. Does voice still retain its dominance in customer interactions? Has web or mobile self-service portals provided significant CX performance, or are customers still demanding more of you? Ankur, I'll let you start us off.
I feel I'd be stealing Tejesh's thunder over here, because he actually answered this proactively, sort of saw into the future. I think it's becoming less about whether voice is the channel or web is the channel. It's much more about actually having this ability to provide the same experience across all channels, Jonathan. And so some customers might want to call in and they want to speak with Hugo. On the other hand, others might want to chat and they would want the Hugo experience too, right? What we are seeing though, and this is an interesting trend, the portal on its own is ending up, ideally, people would want to have an interaction versus sometimes go to the portal. And you can almost see with your own behavior with an Amazon.com, for example, right? You'd almost prefer buying without actually having to go to the portal. And so we're seeing conversational AIs in the form of chats, in the form of AI assistants, and in the form of voice actually provide that same experience. Maybe they're taking a little share away from those portal journeys, which actually now feel unwieldy. And how strange is that? Because 15 years back, being digital meant having a website. So the world has clearly changed.
Right. Very good point. Jamie, your sense?
Yeah, I guess the omni-channel experience is quite key. I think if we go back even a few years ago, phones, phone calls were quite dominant. I think the current customer base, and Ankur, you kind of touched on it now. The expectations are changing and they're evolving, and customers will look for multiple options, right? So in the past it would have been pick up the phone and call us, and now it's pick up the phone, or I can go onto my app, or I can go onto the website, or I can have a chat with a web chat consultant. So there's a lot more options at hand. I think if you kind of peel it back, given that most organizations still have a large dominance in phone calls, it's that customers will look and search about how they can do something quickly and effortlessly themselves. If they can't, they'll call you and they'll call you and they call you. So the safety comfort is the phone, but it's almost around how do you again design the experience where you're providing those effortless other experiences, so that the assisted experience isn't the one that is obviously reflected to the straight away, because I think that's the safety net. The pick up the phone and call us is the safety net, but then as organizations are getting smarter and understanding customers more than ever, it's really starting to move into that omni-channel kind of era, I guess.
Well, just to add a little bit to this, is there kind of an age grouping associated with the technology? So an old geezer like me, I'm likely to pick up the phone and want to talk to you. But perhaps my daughter is going to text you, chat you, come across Slack, do Okta, who knows, whatever there's out there, right? So is there an age component to the client base?
That's a good question, Jonathan. I was smiling because you almost read my mind, and we've only met for the first time. The AI is kicking in. So it's almost like a three-dimensional view from my lens, or if we look at it, it's definitely generational, Jonathan, right there. And then the other one is product-based, right? There's certain products you're going to want to talk to, and then what's the call type, right? So if I just needed a quick claim status, I'm going to text. But if I want to go and update a beneficiary and I want to make sure it's done right, I'm going to want to talk to someone or at least go to a website where I can see the content. But I think over time, the generational piece is going to be the most critical, and speed and accuracy. So to your point, the texting and maturity of that, conversational maturity, voice maturity, I think are going to be key attributes as our customer base changes over the next 5, 10, 15 years. I think it's going to be critical to what Jamie said and even what Uncle said. It's going to be omni-channel or channel all, right? Like it has to be the unified experience, and we just got to make sure that our systems can deliver it in whichever experience they're looking for. So.
Yeah, well, one of the progress steps that conversational AI brings is kind of coming out of the IVR designs that were really all about call deflection, and it was really from a company perspective to manage the inbound calls, divert it, and hopefully manage it with as few people as possible. But interesting, that same study I read from before says that 83% of customers expect to interact with someone immediately, and 82% expect to solve complex problems by talking to one person. The state of service report shows what we all felt we knew to be true, and that is people want a human connection. And that's kind of the charter here, is to build human-like interaction using conversational AI. And I know that all of you have looked at this opportunity as we go forward and figuring out just exactly how could we deliver this technology. And that brings us to kind of our last question before we can get to some of the customers. May I remind the attendees that one way to enter your questions is using the Q&A button. Some of you have been trying on the chat side and it hasn't been as successful. So hopefully that'll get a few more questions in while we finish up our side. The last point I wanted to make is really a trend change that you're seeing within either your own companies or in Ankur, as you've gone out and guided literally hundreds of companies. What are the priorities in performance evaluation? Is it always just OpEx and ROI, or has CX taken a more prominent position as we see a change in the thought process of how to support our client base? Are you seeing some of that shift in your efforts? So Tajesh, I give you that opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe 5, 10 years ago, definitely OpEx ROI, but customer experience is becoming a prominent and go-to strategy for Guardian, and I think a lot of insurance carriers, and overall, I think most companies are looking at that because if you don't, you could try to attack an ROI or OpEx, but if you don't have a customer, doesn't matter what your goals are, right? So, and if you don't have an experience that the customer is willing to, share with their friends, their family, and it's et cetera, you're going to eventually have less and less customers over time. So it's more of a long-term and opportunity for us as opposed to the short-term. I need to save a couple of dollars. So we are pivoting and we're positioning more and more of our customer experience and prominence, and how do you ensure that each one of our products, each conversation we have is working backwards or talking about the customer and saying how we're going to achieve their full potential, and shifting over from more product to more away from product to more customer orientation is I think I think the insurance industry is going through that transformation, but we are as well in parallel. So.
And did you see, just as a follow-up point, did you see COVID kind of I'll say accelerate this process where people are now interfacing with centers and call centers and dealing with those types of environments, obviously versus bricks and mortar and visiting buildings or whatever? Does that put more pressure on this service and the associated differentiation? Because you've got everybody now in that kind of similar method by which they're interfacing with their end users.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it accelerated, to your point, Jonathan, but I think it also allowed a lower level of risk tolerance, right? So historically, you'd put it through some type of POV or proof of value or MVP, et cetera, and then you'd have to have a lot of stakeholders come and make an agreement. I think, COVID actually allowed that threshold to come down a little and take on more risk and adopt new techniques. Even going paperless, for example, because that's an outcome again, right? There's no going into an office, there's no printing out, et cetera. Fax machines not everywhere. So, I think it definitely accelerated, but also gave us an opportunity to take some what Ankur called earlier, some lab type or experiments and move them right into production in a controlled manner, right? We wanted to ensure that we don't put the company at the risk or the customer at risk, but definitely allowed us to accelerate a lot more of our innovation the last, I would say, 14, 15 months. But that has set this tone now to saying you can go faster within our company, right? We needed maybe that push from COVID, but now it's the norm at Guardian to keep trying to go faster and faster with improving our customer experience.
So it proved to be a catalyst for the necessity of innovation and the speed at which you had to innovate. So it really did have pretty powerful impact on you. Jamie, how about at IAG? How are things going there?
Yeah, so I guess firstly, ROI equals CX, right? So that's probably the simplest way that I would kind of look at it from that perspective. But I guess where we've kind of really seen the light is that by leveraging this kind of capability, you are uplifting that customer experience, and like just mentioned, I guess the end outcome here is around the customer base. So either the retention, no one likes a leaky bottle, so you really need to look at it, from a claims perspective, that you are filling up the bottle of water. I guess you can use that analogy. And I guess by leveraging these kind of capabilities, you're effectively ensuring that the water doesn't leak out of the bottom, right? And that's the ROI, right? Because word of mouth spreads. That there's a lot of the customer base, these days where people talk, whether it's family functions or friends get together, people talk. So it's almost around how do you invest in your capabilities and measure your performance based on the customer outcome, and identifying that widget, right? So when I say widget, I mean what is the actual piece that you are actually going to be measuring. So is it a customer's logged in? Is it a customer has walked away from an AI conversation with the answer, or have they had to call? So really measuring the widget itself allows you to be able to have clear visibility of, is the performance a positive outcome, or you're effectively pushing customer interactions from one funnel to another funnel.
Well, it's interesting. Before I let Ankur give us his view from a number of his clients that he's dealt with, one thing I would say is an interesting change in the customer service environment is if you had a bad experience with a company, that's probably where it ended. You just had a bad experience and maybe you told a friend or a family member or whatever. Today, bad customer experiences wind up on social media. And the next thing you know, the magnification of that one issue or that anger, that it could spread into substantial damage. So, from our standpoint, that's what makes the customer experience so important. That differentiation and support has become just heightened in terms of how we perform in our companies. Ankur, you've seen lots of these decisions on the client base, just pure OpEx, or really thinking about how do I change the game?
So we had some very interesting insights, Jonathan. So we looked across our clients and worked with them to look at their AI implementations. And we actually created 3 segments. So there were a lot of AI implementations where cost or OpEx was a big focus, right? And that was like starting off on the back foot. Those under-delivered and sometimes didn't get off the ground, because if you start off with cost, there are better ways to cut cost, your investment doesn't get justified. There was a second segment which focused on customer experience, right? Which we've all talked about. And that did well. But there was a third segment that did better. And that's, to us, the biggest insight. When the business case was only focused on creating speed in the customer experience, you got benefits on cost, you actually got delighted customers, and you got downstream improvement and outcomes. And therefore, to us, that is sort of really the headline of AI. It's experience at the speed of desire, right? That's what AI allows you to do. How do you actually deliver to the customer faster than sometimes they know they want something, right? How do you get that proactivity? How do you get speed? So to us, that's the biggest insight. Speed is the foundation of every successful AI business case today.
Wow. And speaking of speed, we now have to speed up because we've got about 10 minutes left. And I want to turn it over to Avi or Andrew, if you've been collecting some of the questions. But before we get to those questions, Gene, if I could ask you, how did the polls work out? Ah, good. 93%. I love that answer. Thank you all. How about the second one? A little bit more spread out, but that lack of usable and useful data, they're all with Guardian Life on that one. Hugo obviously influenced them. Excellent. Thank you very much for your opinions there. Very insightful. And I think the legacy issue also obviously was impactful. So I'm going to turn this back to Avi. You have some questions that you've accumulated. Let's put them to the panel.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jonathan. And I think we've got a few questions going across categories. So I'm just going to club and probably point it to people. And I think the first one we're going to pick up is which kind of Ankur led to in his last comment around customer adoption. And Tajesh, if I may just request you, there are kind of people interested in knowing that how have you used what kind of strategies have you used to enhance the adoption part from a customer perspective? And if you can give some particular examples from your perspective on there, and then I'll come back to Ankur on that.
Yeah, I think for us, it's not forcing it to them, right? And saying you have to use this, right? Because then they will, so I think it's more of an option for them. Introducing it through our website as an opportunity, and even on our voice saying you have the option, and then learning from that too, right? So okay, why are they always looking for the live rep, right? Just hitting the number. So a lot of just giving them optionality, but then as learning from it and understanding, is it our rule set or our engine that's not meeting their needs, or is it truly our product set? Meaning are we just from a complexity perspective, but it's more of an options, and then starting small, right? Not saying every single customer is going to get this experience. Specifically, for us, it's around claims verification or status or verification of benefits. So it's starting where first of all, we also can control some of it and ensure that they have the right experience, and then it's a volume area for us, but not the biggest volume area. But over time, then if we learn from that, you scale and you grow out of it. So I think that's the way to look at it. It's more sharing and then partnering with the customer, right? And then saying here's your option, and then advancing our services to meet that, but starting in a controlled method. That's the way I would look at it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I think that's important. Interacting and keeping customer in loop and evolving with them, I think gives that benefit. Ankur, just a quick point from your side on this one, because there is another question around wider insurance industry and what are we seeing there?
Just a quick point. I think for customer adoption, really how you take care of the failures are almost as important as the successes. And so what that means, all of us have been on an IVR going 0, 0, 0 for agent, right? You don't want it to get there. So you want to proactively figure out when you're hitting an issue and route it to a human. And that's when people will work with the AI, right? Because if they know that they're not going to hit a wall if there is a failure point. So I think that's the other side of how you manage customer adoption.
Yeah, fair enough. While I have you, Ankur, there's another question, more not from the adoption perspective, but just the stories or examples from sales and service sides within voice. If I can just request you to give a flavor of what you are seeing, not only in the US market, but globally from your perspective. We have heard a bit about claims, as well here, but voice in sales and service.
Yeah. So typically, if you think of the frictionful part of a sales process, It's actually onboarding the customer, getting information from them, missing information which doesn't come in at the beginning, right? And that's where a conversational AI really works well. So if you've got to fill up, for example, I actually took a 50 field form, and you don't know how to fill it in, and you might fill in a field wrong because there may be complex things, especially if it's a loan application or you're giving underwriting data. That's where the conversational AI can actually assist you while you're filling in the form. So even if you don't want to speak to the AI directly, as you're filling in the form, it can be your assistant. And those are some really good use cases. On servicing, I think Tajesh talked and Jamie have talked about a lot of these use cases, right? There are a lot of these transactional things. You just need some quick information. You need to know where your claim might be, or you want to figure out your eligibility. I think in those cases, conversational AI works. The sales piece, it's removing friction from getting information.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I think another point that is coming in the theme is, as we're looking at least from a medium to large organizations, is how do you come around the organizational silos when we talk about initiatives that may have started small, but they have to expand to get to the scale, right? And Jamie, if I may kind of request you to give a flavor on that, especially when you think of an organization like IAG, where you have different units. You'll have the business side talking about things, and then the technology and the various side. What's your kind of spin on and flavor on how to come across those silos and lead them to success?
Pretty simple from my perspective. Your journey, your customer journey map. So if you think about sales or service, or if you think about claims or retention, etc. They might be different units or different business areas within an organization, given the separation in kind of tasks that they do. But what's really key is ensuring that your customer experience, you've got a clear view end to end, right? So if you only have a customer journey map for claims, and you have a sales and service one over here, and someone else is doing something off to another side, you're definitely going to breed a lot of silos, a lot of disconnect. So what is very key in an early stage of an organization going down a technology kind of path is ensuring that you've got a very clear journey map that stretches across your whole value chain. Abby, that'll be very, very key to start off with.
Very fair point. Tajesh, from your experience, was there something that you kind of encountered when you started the journey, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I think for us, we always look from the role and anything we look at it, it's more from an enterprise lens, right? So for our case, it was even, I know Jonathan and I've been going back and forth with Hugo, the naming, we actually looked at from an enterprise, right? So saying, Hugo is going to be for the enterprise. If it's for our direct to consumer, our individual markets, our group benefits, or absence, Hugo is going to be the channel or the digital assistance across the enterprise. The key also is, in our case, for those, IPsoft has that capability to be BU specific too, right? So it can be Hugo, but then the routing could be go to group benefits for systems, go to IM systems, etc. So don't force one thing, but also look at it from an enterprise scale is what we also looked at it. But leverage a platform that can be accustomed to your business behind the scenes, but the front door is that one unified look. But behind, then the routing can occur similar to what we talked about earlier, IVR, right? So I think it's key to have one door, but then have logic and technology that can assist to that routing. Is the way we look at it.
Well, Avi, we've come to the end of the evening, the day, the beginnings, whatever the time frame is that you've decided to tune in and attend. And I couldn't be more privileged and proud of the three gentlemen that joined me on this panel. I think that you have articulated very well your experience within your companies and your experience without, as you've guided other companies through the process. Abby and Andrew, both, I thank you. And again, I thank everyone who decided that they would spend an hour with us. I hope that it has been fruitful. If there are additional questions that you want, please submit them. We'll try our best to get to you and get them answered. But again, I want to thank my panel. It was an excellent job. I just want you to know, though, Tajesh, Amelia's crying digital tears over her. It's Hugo, not Amelia, but she'll get over it.
Thank
So
you.
anyhow, thank you all. It's a pleasure.